Mike Littlehills is our next presenter, and he's going to talk to you about the one thing that has the greatest impact on your health: sleep.
Lots of myths and misunderstandings, get your 8 hours, see you tomorrow. One of the major health pillars, very much the third or fourth health pillar.
They're a little bit hesitant to make changes. There's so many things that are happening in our lives right now that are beyond our control.
One of the leading contributing causes of death and disability in industrialized countries is high blood pressure and its consequences, the heart attacks, the strokes.
If I have anything, I try 3 days of fasting. And if it doesn't get better, I consider a treatment.
Practical demonstration of what I want to share with you today, which is breath work.
Probably around, I would estimate me to be around 16 years old. And my mother had psoriasis, just a small amount on her elbows.
Helps with inflammation. It helps with there's so many medical benefits associated with cold exposure.
We're going to begin with the first element, which is water.
Today we're going to talk about memory. It's a very hot topic, and I am very passionate about helping people improve their memory and age healthfully, cognitively, physically, and socially.
Oh, I am so excited, everyone. You're all in for a treat. So this virtual panel assembled before you is made up of Dr. Françoise Wilhelmi de Toledo, Cynthia Thurlow, and Dr. Alan Goldhamer, who combined together have more than 100 years of experience with fasting. This is such a privilege to have this panel together. So Dr. Françoise Wilhelmi de Toledo is the medical scientific director at, and I apologize if I don't pronounce this correctly, at the Buchinger Wilhelmi Clinics located in
Buchinger Wilhelmi.
Wilhelnger Wilhelmi Clinics located in Germany and Spain, where each year they treat 6,000 people from all over the world, 70% of them practicing long-term fasting. She's a published researcher and author. Also with us is Cynthia Thurlow. She's the CEO of Everyday Wellness Project, a nurse practitioner, an international speaker, and globally recognized expert in intermittent fasting and nutritional health. And with us is Dr. Alan Goldhamer. He is one of the world's leading experts on medically supervised water-only fasting. He's a frequent lecturer and speaker on fasting, diet, and treatment of chronic diseases to achieve optimum health. In 1984, Dr. Goldhamer founded and became director of TrueNorth Health Center in Santa Rosa, California. Since then, he has supervised the fasting and care of more than 20,000 patients. All right, so to get things started, and in the spirit of getting to know more about each of you, this is a 3-part question for all the panelists. Please share with us how you discovered and got started with fasting, the difference it's made in your life, and how you think the world would be different if everyone adopted some sort of fasting process for their lives. So let us get started with Cynthia.
Oh, well, thank you. It's really exciting to be a part of this incredible panel. I guess the first part of the question is, how long have I been involved with the fasting process? And so it's really been over the last 6 years. I started getting very serious about it about 5 years ago. I wish it had been something that I knew more about when I started as a nurse practitioner over 20 years ago, generally speaking. I truly believe that if more people ate less often, that we would have a significant reduction in metabolic disease, metabolic inflexibility, diabetes, the sequelae resulting from this, including fatty liver disease, as well as a constellation and domino effect of so many other health issues. And I truly believe that people would have a better quality of life. So on so many levels, I really believe utilizing this strategy would give people a tremendous boost in their lifestyle and quality of life markers, which we may, in this, this current world realm that we're in, may be able to prolong life. But I really believe that the metabolic health of the world is really at stake at this point in time. And so we really need to reverse a great deal of the trends. And I believe I forgot one of the questions that you asked. So my apologies. Which one did I miss?
How did you get started and the impact that it had on your life?
Thank you. Okay. So about 6 years ago, in the course of 1 week, I had a colleague and a personal trainer who mentioned intermittent fasting to me. And so in my typical fashion, because I'm a nerd and a science person, I really dove into a lot of the research. I felt really impressed with what I was looking at, decided to implement it in my own personal life. And I think in many ways, for anyone that's middle-aged or older, you have to change what you're doing. And so I was really stuck in perimenopause, the 5 to 7 years preceding menopause. And I feel like this was incredibly instrumental in giving me my life back, allowing me to, feel as fit and agile as I normally did, minus the chronologic age piece. So on many, many levels, I think that it helped inspire me to be able to share this strategy with my own patients and, any other person that was willing to listen to me in terms of how much it changed my life.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Dr. Wilhelmi de Toledo.
Well, I discovered fasting through a book with 17. It was the 68th years. And on that time, we were interested in all sort of new ideas coming from all over the places. I heard for the first time about the word ecology, feminism, organic agriculture or organic eating, and pollution, and of course fasting. So I tried, but I was alone. No one could guide me. It was an extraordinary experience, almost life-changing experience. The only thing was that the landing was extremely difficult. I had a lot of problems. No one could tell me what to do. It was 16 days of fasting. And so I understood that you need a guidance. It's something you cannot just improvise. And so I did my medical studies in Geneva, always hoping that someone could tell me what is the physiology of fasting. Where does all the effects, the benefits I had, especially this clarity of the mind, the lift of the mood, and of course an extraordinary energy that comes at that time. I was very young, and no one could tell me. They didn't even understand the question. So I turned to the obesity world, because at that time you had the 0-calorie diet who was doing something like this. And then I discovered the Buchinger Wilhelmi Clinics on the shores of Lake Kansas in Germany and Spain. And this is there where I found my husband, my job, and everything. And so now I'm there 40 years, and I learned how to, this clinic, the first one was founded in 53, the second one in Spain in 73. So there is a huge clinical experience. The founder was a doctor, Dr. Otto Buchinger, and so it was immediately placed in a medical therapeutic context, but having the 3 dimensions of fasting. Another one who is the spiritual inspirational dimension, and also the community dimension. We are the fantastic, very multicultural, tolerant, international community. It's one of the wonderful aspects of fasting. My life would be already dead if I didn't have had that. How many treatments I avoided, always saying, this is my attitude. If I have anything, I try 3 days of fasting. And if it doesn't get better, I consider a treatment. And most of the time it gets better, so I know how to manage now. So a huge difference for myself personally. And I think the world would be totally different. First, because we would have a medicine, let's say the drugs, the surgery, all the wonderful things we know, and especially the imagery and all that, would be complementary. The basics are nutrition, fasting, return to the circadian rhythms, to intermittent fasting during the day. And I think also for the tolerance in the world and for the opening to, because when you fast, you are peaceful. Also the animals. You don't want to waste your energy. And I think they would make a big difference in the world if the traditions of fasting, medically based this time, not just would make a big difference. And also a wonderful example of ecology, because our body has this self-cleaning mechanism that we could learn in economy to imitate.
Yeah, we'll definitely get more into that. What about yourself, Dr. Goldhamer?
Well, I met a doctor when I was just a kid named Gerald Benish, who said that, and he was a doctor that specialized in using diet and fasting. And he said that he had the best job in the whole world because the patients did all the work, the body did all the healing, and all he had to do was take credit for the good results. And I thought that's the job for me. And I know my early experience, my uncle was a physician who said that alternative medicine was the worst thing that you could do, that nobody in our family would ever go to one of those types of doctors, let alone become one of those doctors, and that better I should be a communist spy. And I remember my dad, who was a pretty serious guy, took me aside and he said, son, you know, I don't know much about this alternative medicine stuff, but anything that makes him that angry and mad, it can't be bad, so you stick to your guns. And I think the world would be very different if people understood the role of diet and fasting in promoting health, because right now you have 9.6 years of debility and 16 years of poor health for the average person in industrialized countries. And most of the money we spend on healthcare is spent on things that don't improve how long or how well you live. So I think if people understood these principles, we could dramatically reduce the numbers of years of debility that people spent, redirect our economics in healthcare, and probably move us in the direction of helping save not only our own lives, but also the ability of the planet to support life.
Oh, I love it. Love it. Yes, the impact, which is so great. And I love how you all had different start to introduction to it, but you have committed now your life to educating, encouraging, supporting, and walking people through the process of fasting. And we're definitely going to get into the different types. And clearly, you know, the basic definition of fasting means that there's a period of time where you are not eating. So now this panel nicely represent what I would say are the short-term fasts. So intermittent fasting to mid-duration, 3 to 14 days, and then the longer fast of 30 plus day. So we're going to get to the benefits of fasting. Before we do that and cover the different variety of fasts, Dr. Wilhelmi de Toledo, can you explain to us why all-day eating every day is not ideal for our digestive system and our health?
Well, you know, we are programmed from our brain and our organs for this circadian rhythm, which means 24 hours with the darkness during the night and the daylight. And our brain is programmed for that. This means when it gets dark, fast, sleep are putting our circadian clocks in synchronicity. They work together. And if you, during the day, you are alert, you eat, and you have plenty of daylight, which stimulates a lot of functions. During the night, other functions are stimulated, especially in the sleep phase. So it corresponds to our prehistoric programmation. And we didn't mutate in the last 3 generations where with the electrical lightning, etc., and the screens, and the food always at your disposal, even very bad food and very sugary and fatty and cheap fats. All that didn't exist, so we're not programmed for that type of thing. And furthermore, we have also another rhythm in the body. This is the rhythm of the season, 1 year rhythm. And you have always, almost all over the places in the world, a season with low sun exposure because of the inclination of the earth. And in this season, the people had to fast. And fasting was linked to a lot of benefits like self-cleaning. And this is as regeneration that we are missing if we don't follow these periods, long-term fasting, once a year, for instance, and then every day with what we call today intermittent fasting. But it just means that you leave a long period of time without eating over the night.
All right. Well, thank you. So we're not designed to be eating all the time. So fasting is, like she so brilliantly explained, is about tapping into more the way things were, and the design, our bodies are such an incredible, I don't like saying machine, organism, that we need to understand how they work in order to maximize what you get. Now, Cynthia, in your experience, let's tap a little bit to those who are here, those who are listening. Let's explain, based on the different people that you have worked with, what are the fear, anxiety, and apprehension people have about changing their mindset around eating 24/7?
It's a fantastic question. And I think it really speaks to a lot of the dogma that we have literally been fed throughout our lifetimes, that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, which is propagated by the cereal industry, breakfast food industry, convincing people that they have to eat frequently to quote unquote stoke their metabolism, acknowledging that, we have to be eating a carbohydrate dense diet in order to have plenty of exercise. So I think on one level, we have dogma that we really have to get people to be receptive to rethinking, because in many ways, some of these things are just instilled in who we are as individuals. There's also a layer of fear about what's going to happen to us if we're not eating frequently. And there's also, in light of the global climate with the pandemic presently, there's a lot of what I refer to as lizard brain, but the amygdala, which is kind of the very primordial center of our brain that is designed to encourage us to run away from things that will eat us or hurt us or harm us, is oftentimes overriding the prefrontal cortex, so the thinking part of the brain. And so in many, many instances, there's a great deal of primal fear that not having access to food is somehow going to mitigate uncomfortable feelings. And so in many ways, there's a whole psychological component, not only to this retelling, reteaching aspect, but I find that the biggest fear of all is the fear of the unknown. And on many levels, I think that people are scared to change. It's not that they're resistant. They're frightened to change. They're scared to change what they've been doing. They're a little bit hesitant to make changes. There's so many things that are happening in our lives right now that are beyond our control. And so it would be remiss if I didn't address that there's this huge psychological component that I think mitigates a lot of the behavior, whether it's maladaptive or otherwise. And so a lot of what all of us are doing is encouraging people to evolve, shift, and change throughout our lifetime, that it's really critically important that we are open to the possibility that maybe what we were taught growing up, whether it was in our family dynamics or at school, may not be correct. And so I was trained, as I'm sure everyone in this panel was, to question, and to question in a way that, in a thoughtful manner, and do research and to dig a little deeper. And so on many levels, I think that is what drives these concerns about changing our behavior, that it really is not just, I don't want to do it. I think that there's so much more multi-layered in that decision-making process that can be a bit overwhelming for people to consider, or patients to consider for that matter.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I know I heard an interview, and we'll have Dr. Goldhamer get us started with the inspiration behind it, right? So we'll start talking about the benefits before we even get to the different types, that will raise to the surface. But Dr. Goldhamer, if you could tell us a little bit, because your own brother was having health issues, and there you are. Have treated over 20,000 people, and he was not willing to go that route.
Well, yeah, people have to be appropriately motivated, and the most effective motivations are pain, debility, and fear of death. And so my brother, like most patients, until they're appropriately motivated with pain, debility, and fear of death, are not going to do dangerous and radical things like eat well, exercise, or go to bed on time, let alone go through periods of deprivation like fasting. People think if they get on a plane in New York and were to fly all the way to California, they would die somewhere over Colorado from starvation. Except those pretzels saved their life. That's basically where people are at. They think that their problem is deficiency vulnerability. And of course, that's because that's how we're programmed biologically. Get enough to eat, don't get eaten. That's the biological imperative of life. So we're not designed for an environment of dietary excess where people are suffering metabolic syndrome from eating too much greasy, fatty, processed foods. we're designed for an environment of scarcity where most people don't get enough to eat, don't live to reproduce, don't pass on their genes. The people that did pass on their genes had characteristics that allowed them to survive this period of deprivation. And so it's eat as much as you can, whenever you can, of the most concentrated foods possible. And if you do that in a natural setting, maybe you'll live to reproduce. In the modern world, those biological characteristics that allowed us to survive in the world of our ancient ancestors work against us. And now we can get dietary excess and develop consequences of excess, which never happens in nature, except in the modern era of highly processed foods. And so I think you're overcoming essentially a billion years of evolution, which is, designed to solve the major problem of deficiency. And we're not well equipped biologically to deal in this environment of excess. Our ancestors only fast by force, not by choice. They fast because spring came late. And this ability to fast was so critical to our biological survival that all the humans that can't fast, that is, can't convert their main burn of glucose from burning fat to from burning sugar to burning fat, they died. That's why they call it a biological adaptation. Every human being, because of our large bulbous neuronal net, had to have the ability to change from sugar to fat in order for us to be able to, handle our migration away from the tropics. And as a consequence, we've just taken this very natural ancient process of fasting and applied it in a modern era that's very abnormal. That is conditions of dietary excess. It's not surprising that most of the conditions that respond to fasting are the very conditions that are caused by dietary excess.
Oh, let's dig a little more deeply into that, because that ties into those benefits of fasting. So high blood pressure, the change in that. So can you get us started in the benefits with prime examples from your clinic? So each of you, as we get into the benefits, if you can outline how you've seen those in the patients that you have worked with. Dr. Goldhamer, if you can start us off.
Well, sure. One of the leading contributing causes of death and disability in industrialized countries is high blood pressure and its consequences, the heart attacks, the strokes. And we did a study with 174 consecutive patients that had high blood pressure. And we used fasting from 5 to 40 days. And of 174 people with hypertension, 174 people achieved pressure low enough to eliminate medications. And in stage 3 hypertensives, or people whose systolic blood pressure starts at 180 or above, we had an average effect size of 60 points. So it's the largest effect that's ever been shown in treating high blood pressure in humans. Essentially, everybody with essential hypertension, if you fast them long enough, you feed them properly, will normalize their blood pressure, eliminate the need for medication, and resolve this contributing cause of death and disability. The same thing's true with type 2 diabetes. About 80% of people can achieve normal blood sugar without medication. Autoimmune diseases, the whole host of diseases where the body attacks itself, in part aggravated by gut leakage, is profoundly affected by the use of fasting and a whole plant food diet. And in some conditions like lymphoma, which is a type of lymph cancer, we've been able to demonstrate that patients are able to resolve and maintain resolution of this condition by doing fasting followed by a whole plant food SOS-free diet.
Oh, wonderful. Dr. Wilhelmi de Toledo, you also have published some studies on the benefits. Can you share some of those with us?
Well, one going in the same direction that was just quoted by Dr. Goldhamer. Our study had 1,610 patients, some hypertense, some others treated, some not treated, and some normotense. And the extraordinary thing we saw is that fasting is modulating the normotense people. They diminish a little bit their tension, but they stay in the normal range. The hypertensive ones, they go down, and because sometimes they are not recognized, not treated. And the hypertensive treated, they still go down with the blood pressure, even when you have to take the medication, because you don't want to bring them in a collapse. So you have to take away the medication, and the blood pressure is still going. You have no rebound in a certain sense. So that was just a confirmation what we observe every day. This metabolism in general is reset by fasting. So especially the blood, the glucose and the fat and the lipid metabolism. In lipid metabolism, we have just a study which has been published 3 days ago in the European Journal of Nutrition with 100 persons who where we analyzed not only the cholesterol, but also the subfraction of cholesterol, and so showing that the heterogeneity linked to lipids is extremely bettered, and especially the small dense subfraction of LDL, which are really heterogenic, they're the ones who diminish the more. So it's just like magic, you know. And when you go on, for instance, we have measured the fatty liver index, and this is going down, and you can well, we don't do that on a routine, of course, but if you have a fibroscopic examination of the liver, you have a shrinkage of the liver, of course the fat is eliminated, and also probably other tissues, and you re-expand all these organs after the fasting. And then the last study we did was, well, the third one also, with these metabolic parameters and the mood. For me, the mood is something where, and in our method, was a bit different than water fasting, but probably have an opportunity to talk about it. We noticed that practically all the parameters tend to get better. Many we measured, and especially in the protein metabolism. But this is a study that is not yet published, so I talk about it next time.
All right. Well, we're gonna get more into the benefits as we get into the types. So we're gonna start ourselves off into the shorter, which definitely growing in popularity types, and then we'll get into the midterm, the therapeutic fasting. We'll come back to Dr. Wilhelmi de Toledo for that, and we'll go to the extended fast to Dr. Goldhamer. So, Cynthia, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and let's chat about the benefit that you've seen with intermittent fasting. Explain to us a little bit more what that is and how you work with people and the changes that you've seen in them.
Yeah, thank you. No, this has been wonderful to be a part of this discussion. And so predominantly I work with women, mostly middle-aged women, so women that are late 30s, early 40s and beyond, many of whom are heading into menopause. And so a great concern of many of them is body composition. So on a more superficial but still very significant level for many people, a pain point is weight gain with age. And so that is definitely one of the benefits, although I always say they come for the weight loss and they stay for all the other benefits. And so we start thinking about improved energy related to lowered insulin levels and this fat oxidation, this beta hydroxybutyrate that the brain is using much more efficiently for fuel as they are becoming more fat adapted, using fat as the primary fuel source as opposed to glucose or carbohydrate. I also think a great deal about autophagy, which for many people seems very intangible, but the ability for our bodies to scavenge up and get rid of diseased and disordered cells. And obviously my colleagues will go into greater detail because we know that autophagy really will start to speed up the longer that you are in a fasted state, along with some other specific parameters. I think about people who've had polycystic ovarian syndrome, as they are becoming less insulin resistant, they're improving their insulin resistance, they're improving their lipid panel, their blood pressure. In many ways, if they've had fatty liver, that can be improved upon or even reversed. I know that we also touched on the mood disorder piece, but for many people, as they're eating less often, and really that's what we're talking about with intermittent fasting, is having a feeding window and a fasting period of time. For many people, it can be as simple as 16 hours fasted with an 8-hour feeding window. There's many variations of intermittent fasting, and I'm not sure if you want me to dive into that piece, but when I'm talking to people, when we have that digestive rest and we get to really allow our bodies to do this natural healing process with the gut lining, stem cell activation, a lot of these key terms that people have probably heard of, this is really when the magic starts. I always say it's when we're not eating that this is when the health benefits really get potentiated. And so, when I think about what is most important to impress upon people is that eating less often could look very different day to day. For some people, they may practice intermittent fasting daily, but it could be a 14-hour fasting window one day. It could be a 20-hour the next. I like a lot of variation, and I encourage my patients to not get rigid with that fasting and feeding window, but to be fluid. Certainly for women, if they're still menstruating, there are specific parameters that I generally recommend that they kind of follow the week preceding their menstrual cycle to help them with cravings, energy issues, and sleep disturbances. But that's usually a good starting point. I think really impressing upon people that you do get benefits even with shorter fasts. You don't have to necessarily fast for very extended periods of time. And for people that are just getting receptive to fasting, starting with shorter intermittent fasting periods is generally the way to go. And I just want to add also, the spiritual side of fasting can even be kind of potentiated at less than a 24-hour fasting period. People say they feel a sense of calm, a sense of peace. They can pray, they can meditate, they feel much more relaxed. And I do think that that's a byproduct of, gut improvement, gut health improvement, as well as a balancing in their neurotransmitters. So that's a good start.
And beautifully said. And I can honestly and attest to the fact that as a perimenopausal woman who adopted intermittent fasting to control my emotional eating, quite frankly, I didn't want to cook as much and tap into autophagy and all those benefits. That all those changes were exactly as what Cynthia described. I mean, there's no debating this. Like once you implement it in your life. Now, admittedly, it was very challenging at first to do so. So how you get started, and we'll get into that, how you get started does matter. So, all right. So we're going to switch on over to, because both doctors have clinics and they do longer fasts. And I definitely want to dig into the type of patients that come to your clinic and, how do you get them started and how does someone get through? Because for some people, going 3 to 5 days is unthinkable. And then certainly going 30-day water fast is just not something they can even, wrap their brains around. So let's get into that conversation. So let's start with Dr. Wilhelmi de Toledo. So people come to you from around the world, and how do you get them started with being prepared to go on these extended fasts?
Well, we prepare them in advance by sending them information and films. And when they come, they always have a transition phase. And this transition phase is important. We go in a snack, then they have a mono diet, which one day with only one or two sorts of food, and then the first examination by the doctor. So it's a lot of taking care of the people also, and we have a sort of a accompaniment with talks and films to tell them day per day what they are going to live. And our experience is that after 3 days of fasting, though, after this transition phase, you have the fasting, and the 1 to 3 days can be the days the more difficult for the people, especially who come for the first time. But in our place, since we have exists for almost 70 years, there is a mix. You have always about 50% of the people who come repeatedly every year. So they sort of teach the other ones or encourage them and tell them about the experience. So the community support is important. And the 3 first days are the days where we see these first difficulties from the fasting. We supplement the fasting, but I can tell you something about that. Just with a little supplement, making a softening the transition with a fruit juice. It's only 250 milliliters, vegetable broth and some honey facultative. So it's about 250 calories. But it's for the people a way to keep some meal schedules. So rituals, schedules, a structured day in our experience is extremely important. We have a contact with nature. The difference is that we encourage the people to do submaximal exercise every day, especially in nature, for many reasons. And this is a topic we can discuss because not everybody has the same approach. And after these 3 first days, normally you switch in your metabolism. The ketosis sets on, but reach a steady state after, in our experience, 2 to 3 days. And And then most of the people feel well, and many of the improvements, for instance, for all inflammatory processes, and so they start at that moment that the people start feeling better and having diminished pains and diminished a lot of things. So that's a good experience. And in our experience, then you have a sort of steady state. And the question is, you can have crisis, you can have, and you have to work on the drugs when they have some drugs. And of course, there is a big difference between the metabolically healthy people and the sick, the persons who come for an illness. So it's all mixed in our place. We have people being healthy and other being extremely sick. And then the fasting is getting its course. And then we let the people make a slow food reintroduction over 4 days indoors under supervision. And then we accompany them with films and with recommendations afterwards at home.
All right, excellent. Thank you. All right, Dr. Goldhamer. So let's talk about the TrueNorth procedures. Now, you get a lot of people that are in dire needs. Like you screen them, and they're coming to you because they really need to make some serious life changes, and this is going to be their reboot. So, what is the process? What happens? And let's start. I know Dr. Wilhelmi de Toledo touched on it, but people come to you and they're on medication. So what happens when they enter your care and your facility?
Well, the process starts long before they enter our facility. The process starts by them going onto our website and completing registration forms where we can review their full medical history. And then once we've done that and collected their previous laboratory data, we'll make a determination if this is a person that's going to do well with our approach or not. If they are, we do a no-cost phone screening ahead of time. And so we go through and come up with a game plan. And that means getting them, all of our patients we use intermittent fasting with all the time. So it's between 12 and 16 hours of fasting every day, depending on if we're trying to gain weight, lose weight, or maintain weight, determines the feeding window. But so for a typical patient that's perhaps trying to lose weight, we want them feeding 8 hours, fasting 16 hours. And the days before fasting, we need them on exclusively whole natural food, so fruits, vegetables, raw and cooked, with excluding meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, low salt, sugar, coffee. Basically anything they want, they can't have for a few days. And if they do that before they arrive at the center, it doesn't take us long to lead in, to a fasting protocol. If not, we'll do that lead in at the center. When they come to the center, they go through a full history exam and lab with one of our attending physicians. And then if fasting is appropriate, we'll begin that fasting process as soon as we've weaned them successfully off their medication profile. Now, depending on the medications they're on, we may have been able to get them weaned off before they arrive, or they may need to be at the center, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a few weeks, to stabilize off the medications. Once they're stable off the medications, we'll begin fasting. The fast will range up to 40 days. We don't do fasting over 40 days routinely. But and that process is dependent on how long it takes them to get to the point where when we refeed them, they won't need to go back on their medications. They've resolved their symptoms, et cetera. And also depending on what their reserves are. Not everybody can fast unlimited periods of time. So we're monitoring electrolytes. We're seeing them twice a day with staff doctors where we take their vitals, we assess them, and then we're, throughout the course of the stay, they're going through intense educational classes. So fasting duration, you don't know exactly how long it's going to be before the fast because it's going to be determined by the patient and their response. It's as much diagnostic as it is therapeutic. We know from experience that, depending on for example, with high blood pressure, you can tell based on the person's pressure, their history, their other variables, is this going to be a 5 to 10 day fast, or is this a 30 to 40 day fast, or is this going to be a series of long fasts in order to get resolution? We have the luxury of working with a lot of really motivated, self-selected people that are willing to do anything, even eat well and exercise in order to be able to get well. And so we have very high success rate because we've got very well pre-selected patients. We basically don't take people unless we think they're going to have the kind of results that we're looking for. We have the luxury of doing that because we have a lot more people than we have capacity to service them. And so right now there's a period of 3 or 4 months that people are waiting to get into the facility. During that time, we work with our doctors remotely through our phone coaching services. So they can work with the attending they're going to work with ahead of time. And sometimes It's interesting because we'll enroll a patient in the study, but by the time they come in, they're already better. It's so annoying, They've resolved their hypertension, they've resolved their blood sugar issues, because just working remotely is enough to get the job done. Not everybody needs to do a long-term fast to get well. Everybody needs to eat well and live well. And some people, even though they're eating well and living well, they need a little extra help because their problems are so consistent or pervasive. For those people, fasting and sometimes long-term fasting may be a really good solution. But I'm sure my colleagues here will agree, many people are able to recover their health without having to go through the rigors of a long-term fast. But for people that don't respond adequately to the more conservative measures, this can certainly be a viable option.
Yeah, so I definitely want to get into who should do what under what conditions to make sure that we don't have a 17-year-old fasting for a couple of weeks and unsupervised. But before I do that, I'm just curious. I'm asking. I'll start with Dr. Goldhamer. Do you hear any of your patients saying, "What do I do now with all this extra time when I'm not thinking about food, I'm not preparing food, and I'm not obsessed with food"?
No, I don't hear that, because when at the facility, they're seen twice a day by staff doctors. They have 3 program classes a day. They do the educational video programs. They're interacting with people from around the world. There's a lot of staff-patient interaction. So most people are quite engaged. Once they come off the fast, they're eating, they're engaging in exercise, they're going to the yoga classes, they're doing the stuff that it takes to be able to get them acclimated, so when they go home, they can hopefully be successful and make us look good.
Excellent. So they're adding, I guess I was asking because we are a society obsessed with food. So usually if people aren't eating, they're thinking about food, and something is centered around food. And I think one of the beautiful things when you adopt fasting in your life, it frees up a lot of time. It actually frees up a lot of your brain power. So what about yourself, Dr. Wilhelmi de Toledo? Have your patients come back and said, you know what, I love this. I'm free.
Well, this is my experience. For me, fasting is a pleasure. The way we experience is the way I experience myself. Interrupting the mental activity of the brain work, like you say, is a wonderful thing, because you come to the state of presence. You can enjoy nature. You can enjoy other people in a different way. You really live the life we would like to live also when we eat. So our experience is that we have a very strong dimension of not only bringing the people to be occupied, but encouraging them to have moments of silence, moment of they are with themselves. In all the religions, the fasting times were always a time where you made a sort of feedback on your life, or you try to make up your mind about what happened in your life, maybe the last year. Many religions have that every year, and you correct the trajectory. You make a vision quest. You try to see what's the purpose of my life. All this has a very, very intense place in our clinic, or the atmosphere and the spirit for that. And this is why for us nature has a big importance. We live in a very natural place with lake, mountains, forests, and the immersion in the nature with walks, which are not exaggeratedly quick, but this is what the people do, and we encourage them to have moments of just being quiet. At noon, 2 hours, we make a liver pack, and they just still, but the rest of the time is structured, is ritualized, and is a pleasure. We made a study with looking at the side effects, and we have very little side effects, especially in the first days, the typical ones: headaches, fatigue, pains in the low back pains, or some of them, and agitated nights, the sleep difficulties. But the rest of the time, we don't. It's not excruciating at all. We have a lot of people who have no problems. They just come for a holiday and they just look forward for it. So myself, I associated fasting with one of the most extraordinary experiences, not only because it's stunting what the therapeutical effects are, because it's a moment you have sort of an appointment with yourself.
I love that. The peace, the therapy of it, the being present in the moment. And yes, there might be a few days of suffering and pain that you have to get through, but quite frankly, it's worth it once you get to the other side. So Cynthia, let's start talking then about people on the what condition, what type of fasting, and, should they go under medical care or not? So what's your recommendation with intermittent fasting, getting started, the women that you work with, and who should not, definitely not try and do this on their own?
I think that's a great question and a really important one. So when I think about who's really contraindicated, or I put the qualifier, you need to work with your healthcare provider while you're attempting the strategy, even as an intermittent faster. I start with those that have a history of disordered relationships with food, whether it's bulimia, binge eating, anorexia, with the caveat that I've met many people who have found freedom with intermittent fasting, but they need to be working concurrently with a healthcare professional to support them through that process. I think about those that are underweight or have recently been sick. Someone's got a BMI less than 18, they don't need to be fasting. I oftentimes am asked about children, and I always say that, I think an obese child or adolescent could certainly benefit from a lower carbohydrate diet, less processed food, more physical activity, but I'm not a fan of fasting with children. And I do know that there are some research protocols that are ongoing, but that's being done in a very controlled environment. And I would say, the other big qualifier is that if you have a chronic medical condition, you're being treated for diabetes, you've got cardiovascular disease, etc., you should really be involving your healthcare professional, even if it's just to be monitored with your blood pressure or your blood sugar more closely, medication adjustments. But beyond that, when it comes to intermittent fasting, most people do really well. And if I'm really concerned, we can start them off with a 12-hour fast, which is really just what I affectionately refer to as digestive rest, which everyone benefits from without question. And so slowly kind of, if someone is eating 3 meals a day and snacks, the first layer is removing the snacks because no one needs to be snacking, absolutely no one. And then restructuring your meals so that you're really focused on protein and healthy fats first, and then carbohydrates, starting with non-starchy vegetables as a primary starting point. And then also being cognizant if women are still getting their menstrual cycle, the 5 to 7 days preceding their menstrual cycle, I really like them to back down a bit on the fasting if they're doing intermittent fasting, and just being more cognizant of the biological changes that are ongoing, especially with progesterone and estrogen. And then, really ensuring that they've got a firm foundation. What's their quality of sleep? This is where perimenopause and menopause can be sticky because many of these women are already struggling with sleep issues. And I remind them that intermittent fasting is a hormetic stressor, much like high intensity interval training and some other strategies that we do use. So I always remind them, if you're not sleeping well first, let's deal with the sleep piece first, get that dialed in, then add in the fasting, the nutrition piece, which I've already touched on, and also stress management, because intermittent fasting for the right person can reduce our stress, can take the piece out of having to worry about multiple meals a day, allow us to get more connected with exercise, nature, loved ones, etc. But if someone has unmitigated, unrelenting amounts of stress or is very anxious or profoundly depressed, then I want them to kind of slowly dip their toe into the pond for fasting. So that's typically a good starting place for most women, and that's usually what I advocate for. The other piece that I think is really important is acknowledging what people can consume while fasted. Intermittent fasting, let me just qualify that. Hydration, so lots of filtered water, bitter teas, coffee is another piece. And I also like people to include electrolytes because especially if someone's going the lower carbohydrate route, they will have some renal losses of sodium. And so adding back in some electrolytes, which are naturally occurring substances, naturally occurring minerals, is really very helpful to help mitigate a lot of the side effects that people will experience, the headaches, Dave Asprey calls it hypoglycemia. Some of these, behavioral mechanisms that will happen as people are kind of dipping their toe into the fasting pond. So that's a typical, really good starting point for most people.
Excellent. Thank you. Some really great information. All right, Dr. Goldhamer, if people are thinking about doing the 3, 5, 7 days at home fast, water fast by themselves, what are your thoughts, recommendation on that?
We recommend that everybody fast every day for 12 to 16 hours, and that if they're going to fast longer than that, they need to remember that there's a biological price that's paid in short-term fasting, particularly with increased activity, and that's increased gluconeogenesis associated with protein breakdown. If your goal is to maximize fat loss, you need to rest when you fast. If your goal is to maximize weight loss, well, you can do whatever you want to do. But as far as fat loss, fat will be and protein will be conserved if you limit your exercise activity sufficient to the glucose replenishment that's being provided. So anyway, in our model, 12 to 16 hours for everybody. People that need to fast longer than that need to go through history exam and lab with their physician and then get specific advice. I see a lot of people doing themselves, I think, as much harm as good by doing inappropriately applied fasting. And so that's really an unfortunate, I think, error that's made. Everybody should eat well every day. Everybody should fast for 12 to 16 hours. If you're going to do longer term fasting, make sure it's being done appropriate, and you do that by working with a doctor that understands fasting.
So what are some of the signs and symptoms that you've seen where people, they're stepping into that, they're not supervised and they're stepping into that inappropriately fasting?
Well, I get these calls, many of them every week, where people have done long-term water-only fasting, inappropriately applied because of medication complications or health conditions that weren't taken into account. They terminate fasting appropriately, particularly with higher sodium intake, so they get post-fasting edema. In the extreme cases, long-term fasting followed by inappropriate feeding can result in refeeding syndrome and potentially death. So there's all kinds of extreme people doing all kinds of foolish things. You can go on the internet and there are videos that will tell you how to do a home appendectomy. So you can do it, but there's going to be bad outcomes. And you can certainly do fasting. Fasting is a biological adaptation. But if you do it inappropriately or you terminate it inappropriately, you can get really seriously ill. I also see people doing short-term fasting, I think, inappropriately, where they're maintaining high degrees of activity, so they run into hydration issues and, again, gluconeogenesis, so they're ending up with a net breakdown of lean tissue. We've done a study using a DEXA scanner with a Hologic DEXA scanner that allows us to do whole body composition. And we've shown conclusively that if you use fasting appropriately, you maximize fat loss, and particularly and preferentially visceral fat loss. And then during recovery, fat continues to go down, although water, glycogen, fiber, and protein recover. So in other words, you lose weight fasting, you regain weight after fasting, but the weight you regain, if you're refeeding properly, is water, protein, glycogen, and fiber, and the fat continues to go down. And although you might lose, say, in a 15-day fast, 20% of adipose tissue, you may lose 40 to 50% of your visceral fat. There's actually a preferential mobilization, but that's fasting in a resting state. The data on fasting with higher activity is different. You actually may have more net weight loss, but a higher proportion is going to be protein.
Yeah, and so really glad you're talking about that, because one of the things that keep me from doing extended fast is that, I'm a bit of an exercise addict, so I know they don't go well together. You got to do one or the other. But I heard you say, and if you can tell us about this, that you've seen some equal benefits to fasting, same outcome, same result that you would get from exercise. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, it's interesting that a lot of the biomarkers that have been done in the exercise research, for example, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, goes up with exercise. Rats that are given the opportunity to exercise with the wheel don't get dementia. And the BDNF is thought to be protective against neural damage from oxidative damage from free radicals or other issues. Well, BDNF also goes up with fasting, both intermittent and long-term fasting. In fact, if you look at all the different biomarkers associated with benefits in exercise, many times they also are profoundly affected by fasting. And you might say, well, how could that be? How could resting and fasting be associated with the same changes as vigorous exercise? And I think that the answer is that both fasting and exercise are helping undo the consequences of dietary excess. And it's actually dietary excess that's the main reason why people are getting fat, sick, and miserable. And so whether you're doing intermittent fasting or modified feeding or long-term water-only fasting, we're all basically undoing the consequences that shouldn't be there to begin with, that are the result of dietary excess, and particularly eating foods contaminated with excess amounts of salt, oil, and sugar. These highly processed, refined foods, and including refined animal foods. So it's not surprising to me to find out that fasting and exercise actually have a tremendous commonality biologically speaking.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and it makes a lot of sense the way that you explained it. All right, we're almost at the top of the hour, so let me do one final round with your final thoughts to people and how can they get in touch with you. So Dr. Wilhelmy Toledo, if we can start with you.
How can they get in touch with us?
Yeah, your final thought, how to get in touch with you. And
they can get in touch with us because we have a homepage, and we have pages in Facebook, Instagram, and all the social medias from the Buchinger Wilhelmi Clinics, where we have a lot of films, podcasts, and explanations. I would just go back to the point of the exercise and saying that for us, this is the only one of the points where I really disagree with Dr. Goldhamer. I think exercise is perfectly, in our experience, perfectly compatible with the fasting, and is giving the fasting a very special touch, is giving the fasting a very big motivation and extremely big, it's a big source of pleasure. And about the protein breakdown, yes, but the protein breakdown has been too long seen as a negative thing because we associate protein with a breakdown with muscle loss. But there are a lot of metabolically active tissue, which are not muscles, which are much more taken into the catabolism of fasting, like the liver, the spleen, the gut lining, and they will be rejuvenated afterwards. So it's an interesting part that we are studying intensely now, the rejuvenation aspect of not only the metabolic reset, which is very important, but the rejuvenation. And this is done also for people eating very well. Now, how can they get in touch with us? Over any media, and I gave you our links. So
thank you. Yeah, and those are on the website. I think Dr. Goldhamer, you wanted to.
Well, I just wanted to point out you're also doing a different program because you're including some caloric intake, and that might make a profound difference in terms of protein preservation. When you're including a couple hundred calories or more of carbohydrate in the diet, your ability to preserve protein with some level of activity may be enhanced.
To some level, you're right. Yeah, I agree with you. But the interesting thing is that we observed, because we are not forcing the people to take this supplement. And in our last big cohort of almost 2,000 people, we noticed that about 1/3 didn't take the juices and the honey. So it was practically water fasting. And now we're comparing those groups. I can give you the results, or we can discuss that about, because I think it's certainly a way to find the right people to do fasting and resting, and the right people to do fasting and moving.
And I think no matter what, they're not doing HIIT training. They're doing walks, a little yoga. It's still light exercise, and it's supervised. So as you're listening to this, the key is these are two doctors who supervise and have a staff of other doctors that supervise the people that are their clinics. So this is not a debate for you to have at home what to do, what not to do. Well, that's really great. And these are three great minds. But with the clinics, they're doing research, they're publishing research. Each of their websites has the research that they're publishing that they're doing. And so anything that you do, read the research, read the information, the studies that are attached to it. So unless somebody's talking about these topics, referring to research, go find the amazing people that are on this panel who base everything on research. All right. So Cynthia, how can people get in touch with you?
Thank you. I really
final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think what an incredible opportunity to speak on a panel with two physician researchers that I admire greatly. Thank you for this opportunity to connect with everyone. I would say probably my website, www.cynthiathurlow.com. I have a very vibrant podcast called Everyday Wellness, where I get opportunities to connect with incredible medical researchers like we have here today. And I would say I'm very active on social media. I would say Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. I'm everywhere. A wonderful team that is able to help support that. And there's a free Facebook group called Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle / my name, where people can jump in, ask questions, get good content. And I do agree that it's important to be able to reference research, look at research, and also give consideration to the fact that more research is needed, especially as it pertains to women and women that are middle-aged and beyond. I think there's been not enough research done, and so that this is definitely an area that I'm very passionate about, and hope to see that will expand and be able to look at how fasting impacts women and aging and metabolism.
Love it. Yes, please, doctors, take note. I think that is research that's very, because the impact on hormones and for women, it's so drastic and dramatic, and it starts way too early. So, Dr. Goldhamer, final thoughts on how people can get in touch with you.
Well, health results from healthful living. So I think we'll all agree, no matter what you do or don't do, or how you modify the fast or what you do during the fast, the big issue is diet, sleep, and exercise. People have to adopt a health-promoting diet if they actually want to get healthy. To contact us, they can go to TrueNorthHealth.com. We offer a free phone conversation with me if they want to have some questions whether fasting might be appropriate for them. They can go to our website here at TrueNorthHealth.com. We also have a new website through our foundation at fasting.org. And this site will be, I think, the update version of it launches in the next few days. And it's a fasting compendium site. We have the world's literature on fasting that's been accumulated, and it's freely available and searchable. And so it'll be a really good site for people that are interested in looking all the way back to the 1800s. Research has been done on fasting. So we're trying to bring all that together and in one place that'll be convenient to people.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, your insight, all the information that you share. We only touched the surface. So everyone go visit their website. You can find them on the 365 First Challenge website. There's links. Look at their study, join the Facebook group, listen to their other interviews on YouTube where they share even more content information. It's impossible to capture everything within 1 hour. But I want to thank you all, and I truly appreciate it. And you all have changed my life, and there's no way to pay that back. So just thank you.
Thank you, and very much, and all the speakers.